Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Eveling, and today is May 31st. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of Walt Whitman, the American poet, essayist, and journalist. He was born on this day, May 31st, in 1819. Walt is remembered as the father of free verse, and when he was 54 years old, he suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed, and he spent the next 2 years immersed in nature. He believed that nature had helped to heal him. He wrote, "How it all nourishes, lulls me in the way most needed, the open air, the rye fields, the apple orchards." Walt also appreciated flowers. He wrote, "A morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysics of books." And in 1892, Walt wrote about wildflowers in a piece called Specimen Days. Here's an excerpt. "This has been, and is yet, a great season for wildflowers. Oceans of them line the roads through the woods, border the edges of the water runlets, grow all along the old fences, and are scattered in profusion over the fields. There's a beautiful weed covered with blue flowers, the blue of the old Chinese teacups treasured by our grand aunts. I'm continually stopping to admire it. It's a little larger than a dime and very plentiful. White, however, is the prevailing color. The wild carrot I have spoken of, also the fragrant life everlasting. But there are all hues and beauties, wild aster of all colors, notwithstanding the frost touch. Those hardy little chaps maintain themselves in all their bloom." And today is the birthday of Charles McIlvaine, the American author and mycologist. He was born on this day, May 31st, in 1840. Charles was born in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and he served as a captain in the Pennsylvania Infantry. After the Civil War, he always went by captain. When he was 40, Charles moved to West Virginia, where he wrote articles for magazines like Century and Harper's. He was a very good writer. After the war, food was scarce, and Charles started hunting and eating mushrooms. Charles ate virtually every specimen that he encountered, and he even dabbled in mushrooms that were said to be poisonous. If he suffered no ill effects, Charles deemed a specimen edible. Now, before Charles's work, the USDA issued a report back in 1885 that claimed that there were only 12 edible mushroom species in the United States. Well, today, Charles is best known for his 1896 book that was called 1,000 American Fungi. Charles was passionate about mycology, and he included what it was like for him to eat almost every single mushroom that he mentioned in his book. He wrote, "I take no man's word for the qualities of a toadstool. I go for it myself." Charles claimed to have eaten over 1,000 different mushrooms and toadstools, and he said he enjoyed the flavor of most of them. His daring ingestion of so many species earned Charles the nickname Old Iron Guts. Charles lived to be 69, and he single-handedly defied the old saying about mushroom hunters. There are old mushroom hunters, and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters. Well, Charles was indeed an old, bold mycologist. Charles's experimentation was all the more impressive given the challenging nature of mushroom identification. If you find plant identification challenging, Mushroom identification is much more involved and often requires chemical reagents and microscopic evaluation. In our modern times, DNA sequencing can also definitively establish a species of mushroom. Now, thanks to his excellent writing skills, Charles wrote about mushrooms in a friendly and conversational manner. For instance, here's what Charles wrote about the oyster mushroom. The camel is gratefully called the ship of the desert. The oyster mushroom is the shellfish of the forest. When the tender parts are dipped in egg, rolled in breadcrumbs, and fried as an oyster, they are not exceeded by any vegetable and are worth their place on the daintiest menu. And here's how Charles described the vomiting russula. This one's crazy. He writes, "Most are sweet and nutty to the taste." So good taste, terrible name. And he continues, "Some are as hot as the fiercest cayenne." But then he writes, "This they lose upon cooking." And finally, here's a little-known poem that Charles wrote, and it's called Our Church Fight. And I found this very charming. It reminded me of growing up in southwestern Minnesota, where there were churches all over the place and where there was plenty of church fighting to boot. Charles wrote, "I'm that nigh near disgusted with the fight in our old church, where one half's against the other, and the Lord's left in the lurch. And I went and told the parson if he'd join me in a prayer, we'd slip out 'mongst the daisies and put one up from there." Very cute. Well, today Charles is forever remembered in the name of the Journal of the North American Mycological Association, and it's called the McIlvaine, and I think that would have made Charles very happy. And today we celebrate the birthday of the American writer of fiction and poetry for children and adults, Elizabeth Coatsworth, who was born on this day, May 31st, in 1893. In 1931, Elizabeth won the Newbery Medal for her children's book, The Cat Who Went to Heaven. Elizabeth's poems invoke sentiment and thoughts of home. They're often perfect for gardeners, and her poem, November, begins this way. "November comes and November goes, with the last red berries and the first white snows." Her poem, Nosegay, is about a small bunch of flowers. Nosegays were typically sweet-scented, and they were worn at the waist or the bodice. Think of it as old-fashioned aromatherapy. So here's Nosegay by Elizabeth Coatsworth. "Violets, daffodils, roses, and thorn were all in the garden before you were born. Daffodils, violets, red and white roses, your grandchildren's children will hold to their noses." And it was on this day, May 31st in 1920, that a 37-year-old Virginia Woolf gardened with her husband Leonard at their new home that they had just bought the previous year. The garden covered 3/4 of a hectare. It came with mature apple, plum, cherry, and pear trees, so they had a nice little orchard there. And of the two of them, Leonard was more of the gardener, but Virginia was happy to assist whenever she got the chance. And it was in her diary on this day that she wrote these words: "The first pure joy of the garden, weeding all day to finish the beds in a queer sort of enthusiasm, which made me say, 'This is happiness.' Gladioli standing in troops, the mock orange out. We were out till 9 at night, both stiff and scratched all over today, with chocolate earth in our nails." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Pickled Pantry by Andrea Chessman. This book came out in 2012. It's an oldie but goodie, and the subtitle is from apples to zucchini, 150 recipes for pickles, relishes, chutneys, and more. Well, this is one of my favorite books. I use this every single summer, and I love what the publisher says here about Andrea's book. They write, blending your grandmother's pickling know-how with today's internet resources. Andrea Chessman shows you how easy it is to fill your pantry with tasty homemade sauerkraut, salt-cured dilly beans, and rosemary onion confit. Andrea will guide you to helpful websites, and she'll make you laugh with humorous stories. Andrea provides inspiration and encouragement for both first-time picklers and dedicated home canners. And I can tell you from experience that when the pandemic hit and we had that first year of everybody rushing to garden, Andrea's book was a go-to resource for so many people as they were dealing with their very first garden harvest. Now, I thought what I would do is walk you through the table of contents here because that really helps you understand the structure of Andrea's book. This is really a book about pickling. Now, there are some other items, some other recipes that are covered here, but this is truly my pickle resource. So what is covered here is there is a chapter all about pickling, fermented pickles, single jar pickles, then the big harvest fresh pack pickles. Then she kind of pivots a little bit, and here's where Andrea talks about salsas, relishes, and chutneys. This is one of my most dog-eared sections in this book. Next to the other one, which is refrigerator and freezer pickles, that comes right after that. And then finally, Andrea wraps things up with some recipes for enjoying homemade pickles. And these are all delicious. Now, I wanted to share just a little bit about what Andrea wrote in the introduction to this book because you'll get a little glimpse of her marvelous sense of humor. So she wrote this in the introduction. Naturally, I wanted to pack all that fresh harvested goodness into jars to preserve it for the coming winter. And so I asked my grandmother how she made her pickles. Well, my grandmother was not a woman who was enthralled by the domestic arts, nor was she overly chatty. So she told me to put cucumbers and dill in a crock, cover them with water, and then enough salt so, quote, it's just before you gag. Well, that sounds like my mom. That's how my mom tells me about how to make our family recipes. So this one made me smile. Now, the other story that I wanted to share with you is this fantastic idea that Andrea came up with. And this is really great if you're part of a garden club or a group of gardeners in your neighborhood, maybe, where you guys can pool your resources when it comes to canning time. And so here's what Andrea wrote in this little section of the introduction. I had the opportunity to collect pickle recipes and then to gather them together for a book. And it all began with a pickle barter party. I love that because so many traditional recipes yield 7 or 9 jars of pickles or a boiling water bath canner load. And I thought it would be a great idea to swap jars of home canned pickles the same way that people swap cookies. Great idea, isn't that? And such a fun thing to do this summer. You can do it outside and not have to worry about catching COVID. And then you should also hear for a minute what Andrea mentions about pickle preferences. And this is so true, especially if you have kids. This will definitely resonate with you. Andrea writes, what I learned as I tasted my way through batch after batch of pickles is that preferences vary widely. For some people, no pickle is too sweet. Others hate garlic. But inevitably, there is a perfect pickle for every taste. It just requires collecting and inventing many, many recipes. Over the years, I've watched many trends in pickle making, and in the 1970s, just like today, many people rediscovered pickle making as they moved back to the land. And so what's old is new again. Well, I tell you what, you could do a lot worse than having Andrea Andrea Chessman be your guide when it comes to pickling. This is a hefty book. It is 304 pages of pickling everything from cucumbers so that you can make your dills, your half sours, your bread and butters, to other vegetables. Everything from carrots to rhubarb, cabbage to even pineapple. And the bottom line here is you can pickle it. That's Andrea's favorite saying. Now, luckily, Andrea's book is ubiquitous. This book has been around for a decade, and so you can get a copy of The Pickled Pantry by Andrea Chessman and support the show by using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $8. And by the way, if you have a family reunion to go to, or you just want to have a little family picnic, this would be a lovely little hostess gift. So sweet, and that cover is adorable. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark from one of my favorite garden writers, Louisa Yeomans King. This is an excerpt from her book called The Flower Garden Day by Day. And this is what she wrote to herself on May 31st, around 1905. And I thought it was great advice for all of us. It's still timely. So great advice for the upcoming month of June. Louisa wrote, "Take a part of this month, if possible, and visit the Arnold Arboretum in Boston." And of course, here you have to insert the name of your arboretum or your local public garden. Louisa wrote, "Check out the lilacs, the Asiatic cherries, crabs, and general beauty. And in Highland Park, Rochester, New York, see the great lilac collection." Here she gives us another great piece of advice. The notebooks should go too. So if you have a garden notebook or you haven't started a garden notebook for your garden this year, now is the time. And Louisa's a gardener. She knows just how hard it is to pull yourself away from the garden at this time of year. And so she writes, "While it is difficult to leave your garden at such an interesting time, a great enlargening of the gardening horizon is the result of such travels." So happy travels. Make some time to go check out your local gardens, your local arboretum, any type of public spaces where you can find some beautiful gardens. You can take some notes, take some pictures with your phone, and as Louisa would say, enlarge your garden horizon. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. Tomorrow is June 1st, you guys. I can't believe it. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.